Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to finish up today with a special selection, which is where one of you tell me exactly what it is I need to check out. Today's special selection comes at us from Matthew. The request, Earth, Like Gold and Faceted. It says it's over 30, but it's silenced before that mark. It's because of the recording format. So, let's dive into this. Now, the first thing I notice is that this is a 30-minute song, pretty much on the mark. It is 30 minutes and 21 seconds, but as Matthew stated, there's some silence at the end of this from its recording process, so I'm going to assume it's pretty much right up to that 30-minute mark. The second thing I notice is there's only 3 songs on this album, called Earth 2, and it's 75 minutes long. There's a 15.5 minute, a 27-minute, and a 30-minute song. And that is it. This album came out in 1992. Apple Music has it listed as alternative. I'm not even going to say Apple Music is a good source of genre, but alternative is interesting. Let's see where this takes us. This is Like Gold and Faceted by Earth. We're only a minute into the song. I feel like I'm being taken for a ride. What am I in store for? Okay. So we have a lot of feedback. Every once in a while we have what feels to be a bass drum hit. We got a piano coming in. Well, the piano was coming in. The feedback was fading out. Feedback faded back in. We have just passed the 10% marker. It has just been feedback. There are note changes. It sounds like a song is attempting to start, but it can't break through the distortion, the feedback. You get these little glimpses of percussion or guitar work, but that's all it is. It's glimpses. It's drowned out by the feedback. That's not about the song. I didn't get enough sleep last night. I promise. I mean, I am finding it difficult to find things to latch onto critically, but I kind of find this irritating in the same way black metal is, where I really want to hear what's happening musically, and there is some sort of texture that is impairing my ability to do that, and it's frustrating to listen to. We just passed the 30% mark, and we're finally seeing something begin to take shape. Might not actually go anywhere, but it is a lot clearer now than it's been at all. It's interesting that so many of the tones, the pitches that I am picking out, and the melodies crafted with them are always falling into the eerie side of things. I'm starting to hear more tom on the right. So I have a guess at what's going on here, and I've done something similar. We'll talk about it in the analysis. I think I've got an understanding of what this track is aiming for and what it's doing now. So there's definitely a metal thing going on underneath. It's very interesting. You can hear these micro textures, micro changes in the feedback. And it's almost these really smooth movements, these transitions through tones. And again, we'll talk about it later. I got a pretty good idea what's going on here, though. For those still with me in real time, haven't skipped around, we just passed the 50 minute 50% mark. It's interesting listening to the compositional mind here. When do we allow the metal moments to shine more clearly through the noise? And when do we diminish them so the noise is the most prominent? Seemingly random cymbal attacks. Okay, let me point this out real quick. That was not 20 seconds of silence on the end of that track. It was inaudible to my ears, but my visualizer was picking up sounds. Little tidbits. The visualizer has them at negative 60 dBs. Super quiet stuff, but technically it was a fade out until the very last second. So, this is an exceptional song for thinking. I don't know if it was the monotonous droning, just the fact that there wasn't much going on. Well, there was a lot going on, but not a lot going on. We'll get into that. I found it very easy to figure out my thoughts, organize my thoughts, and present them in a way that I think is going to be rather concise comparatively to my other analyses and also educational in some manner, depending on how interested you are in learning about this specific topic. But first, let's talk about what's going on in the music, which might sound kind of funny. We have a very elongated feedback. In fact, 30 minutes and 21 seconds of feedback that fades in and fades out, implying there is more prior and after. The feedback might as well be infinite. It fluctuates with these minor changes, tone changes, texture changes, static changes. It feels singular, but there's a lot going on with it. It's never static, it's never not in flux of some sort, but it does stand still long enough at times to not feel dynamic at all. Behind that, we occasionally get snippets of guitar lines and drum sounds. Primarily, I've picked up on snare, tom, and certainly cymbals, but all of it exceptionally buried beneath the feedback, both volume wise and placement wise. It feels not just quiet, but small. Some concept of this exists for 30 minutes. There is a song going on here with the guitars and drums. In fact, we revisit the opening idea somewhere around the 20 to 25 minute mark, somewhere in there, somewhere closer to the end. We revisit some of those same ideas we heard peeking up at the beginning about the 5 or 6 minute mark. There is a song underneath here, and given the timbres I'm hearing, the tones of the guitar, and the sharpness of the drum hits, I'm going to assume there's a metal song underneath here. I don't know what kind of metal, honestly. There's an eerie creepiness to it all, or to most of it. Anyways, there are a couple of guitar lines that move towards something a bit brighter, but for the majority of the times the guitar could be heard, I say they have an eerie vibe to them. Um, could be pretty much any style of music, honestly. Given the tempo, though, I'd probably say Doom, maybe? It's a bit on the slower end, but I don't know if that's what it is. We'll talk about tempo in a second. The perceived tempo, though, is rather slow, and there's an eeriness to it, and those two give me a Doom vibe. But, like I mentioned, it's not the only atmosphere. There is one that's a bit brighter. It's during a guitar solo. It's a series of back-to-back higher guitar notes, about 7 or 8 of them, that imply a brightness that runs counter to the eeriness that is showcased pretty much everywhere else. But why hide a doom song under feedback? I think this is the question most people are going to be asking. Why does this exist? What is going on? Aside from the raw breakdown, like I just did, yes, it is a Doom song. Yes, there are Doom adjacent song. You can't hear most of it, right? Because it's blocked out by feedback. That is technically what is happening, but what is happening here, right? I think that's why a lot of people would come to the channel hoping that I explain this song. This is where the fun part comes in. You see, there's something very cool happening with the feedback. As I mentioned, there's a fluidity to it. It's static, but also moving. It seems to not go anywhere, but if you ignore it for a minute and you come back, it sounds slightly different. It went somewhere, even though you never felt it go there. It kind of feels amorphous. My ears tell me it's been stretched. There is a very cool program out there called Paul Stretch. Well, yeah, I guess there is a program. There's also a VST version of it nowadays, I assume. It's old. I used Paul Stretch when I was in college. It actually surprised me when I discovered it late last year, early this year, that it had been converted into a VST to be used inside of audio workstations. But you give it a track, whether it's in your audio workstation or you drop like an MP3 in it or whatever, and you tell it how much longer you want it to be by a multiplicative force. If you put 2 times and it's a 3-minute song, it will make it 6 minutes long, and it will do it in the most brute force style of stretching possible. It literally just makes everything longer. If you had a half note, it is now a whole note. But it is not a stretching of the notes themselves like you could do with MIDI. It's a stretching of the audio. So not only is the audio longer, but it's also lower by definition of how audio manipulation works. It's the reason why. Actually, we're going to get a little bit into some science here. There's a reason why pitch correction itself is not a home term. Nobody says, oh, this sounds pitch corrected. They say it sounds auto-tuned, right? Because auto-tune is a very specific type of pitch correction where it it changes the pitch, right? But to change the pitch, you have to make it slower or faster. It's why when you speed something up, it sounds like chipmunks singing. If you just do pitch correction, you're also going to mess with the timing of everything. Auto-tune is an algorithm that not just adjusts pitch, but then also adjusts time, so that it takes the same amount of time while still achieving the pitches that you were intending to hit. It's actually a very complex program, and it is fascinating how it works. Even if everybody's not a fan of it, or the fan of the sound of auto-tune, the science behind it is very cool. But Pulse Stretch doesn't do any of the fixing. It literally just stretches it, and whatever comes out the other end is what it is. It is a very, like I said, brute force stretching of the time with no pitch correction to go with it. It doesn't modulate anything. It doesn't try to retain any sort of semblance of sound. It just literally stretches it and gives you that result, which is where we get this, because when you stretch note changes over such a long period of time, even if they're not pitches that are intended, feedback has a pitch to it. In fact, it has a lot of pitches to it, and we tend to hear them all together in real time. But when you stretch feedback out to such a thin layer, you can hear the individual tones in it. And that's where we get some of the really cool textures going on here. Now, I typically use stretching tools for ambiance, to put underneath or around traditionally composed music. Utilizing it as the most in your face prominent aspect of the track is an interesting decision to go on. if you're making traditional music, which I don't think this is. And before we move on to the next topic, real quick, this is what I was talking about the tempo. It feels like a doom tempo in the metal stuff, but I also could see it being just down tempoed. What if we played a faster song at half speed? Or alternatively, what if we play a song at full speed and run it through a stretcher? If you just stretch it out by 2 times, it's not going to have that super warped, distorted feel like what I think the feedback went through at probably closer to 30 or 50 times as stretching. So it's possible either way they went about. I was trying to listen into the drums and the guitars to hear if they had been stretched at all, and I don't know. Like I said, if they were, it's a very minimal stretching. Some of the time things could have just been on their own. I honestly don't know how they went about composing the metal song underneath the feedback. But that's why I can't say that it is Doom based on tempo, because it might just be a faster song, a typical rock track or a typical, just regular metal that they said, they wrote it at 120 BPM and then played it at 60, right? Which would give it a Doom feel without being written as a Doom song, if that makes sense. But this is actually not a new thing. We've actually checked out something similar to this on the channel before with Paul Jebanassam. Yep. I wasn't entirely sure until I saw the title of the song, which is impronounceable to me. It's got a lot of math and physics symbols in it. But this is minimalism. And your first thought might be, this does not sound very minimal at all. And I want to take this towards art for a second, because I think visual minimalism is easier to understand than auditory minimalism. As a movement, I should say. Let's just lay down some groundwork here to help facilitate this. So, minimalism in art isn't necessarily just going for simplicity. It's about finding the core elements that are necessary to transmit the thoughts or emotions or shapes of something. It isn't just about the simplicity of it. It's about finding what's necessary and shaving off as much fat as you can. Not just about trimming it off until it looks good, but trying to actively remove as much filler as possible until you get down to the bare minimum of what is necessary to convey your idea. Now, we take that into music, and we can end up with minimalistic music, going down to the bare uh, minimum amount of notes necessary to tell your story. But you can take it through the other approach as well, finding the core aspects of something, really getting into the nitty gritty and removing what isn't necessary. One way of doing this, which is what led to the minimalistic movement in music, is to say, what if we get into the nitty gritty of a single bar? What does it mean to explore 4 beats of music for an extended period of time? What does it mean to fully exhaust a 1 bar concept? And that, I think, is what Paul Jebanassam did. And we explored that quite a bit in that video. I'll link it up here so you can check that out if you're interested. But here, it almost feels to me, what if we took a 3-minute song and made it a 30-minute song? What would it be like to explore metal on such a granular level where each nanosecond was actually a full second of real time? What would that sound like? And we get this, which bounces between ambience and the guitar's feedback and metal aspects at times, but not always. I don't think it's a coincidence that the entire song has this feedback texture. It isn't saying that the entire song is feedback, but that they might be exploring just a single verse of a metal song in as granular detail as possible. And that might be a repetition of that same idea with variants to it. We have this guitar lick. What would it sound like if we added this to it, removed that, changed this, altered that? And now we have 64 bars of trying to fully exhaust a single musical concept. This is the goal of musical minimalism. It actually sounds kind of maximalist in a lot of ways. It is a full, in-depth, exhaustive exploration of such minutiae that you do end up with something like this song that is very overwhelming at times. There is a lot going on in minimal ways. Minimalism in music, opposed to minimalistic composition, again, which is utilizing as least notes as you can, took me a long time to wrap my head around. It feels opposite. A lot of minimalistic music is very dense, which feels like the opposite. But when you approach it from that angle of getting into the nitty gritty of something and really exploring such a small moment of music, I think it's a little easier to understand. And that's what we get here. I can't say I enjoyed it. I really can't. I'm glad I got brought up. I got some interesting conversation points out of it. Um, it's very rare that we get something like this on the channel. And like I said, the last time we got it, it was technically techno. Um, I know there's some classical minimalism out there that we haven't explored yet, but I don't think I ever would have expected metal minimalism, and that's exactly what we got here. It's an interesting take. I'm not a big fan of minimalism. I think it's an interesting exercise. I've explored it on my own. Not anything I would ever present as a work of art from me. Very experimental, and it also feels, like I said, an exercise. Something to do and explore, but I've never really felt anything that I've made within it has been anything other than an exercise to turn in for a grade. It's opened my mind to things, musical concepts. It pushes the boundaries, and for those reasons, I enjoy it. I'm glad it's around. It's an artistic endeavor that I think many people don't get, and even less people make. But I will probably never check this song out again. But I do want to reiterate, I'm thankful it was presented to me for us to explore. Those are my thoughts on Earth's Like Gold and Faceted. Hit me up in the comments. Let me know what you thought of it. If you have anything to add, anything to correct me on, if you just want to tell me if you enjoyed it or not, let me know. Above that, head into the description box. There's a link for Linktree. It'll take you to this menu right here. As links for everything related to the channel. You can find multiple ways to support the channel, join the Discord community, email me, check out the music I've made, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three. That wraps it up for today. We'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 p.m. UTC as usual. We'll check out more jazz and another special selection. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.